Welcome to the Everyday Magic Podcast. I'm Anya Rock.
And I'm Dr. Sophia Trivena.
Today, we're going to talk about dreams, intuition, maybe some sex and money.
Knowing us.
We always find our way.
We do.
So welcome back. So, Goddess, you had a dream last night.
I did. How often do we call each other or text each other in the morning? I had a dream.
Well, actually, let me start with, I heard also, we also text each other, good morning, Goddess, and good night, Goddess. And I think there's a study out there, you could probably find it,
I'll let you know.
That actually having someone to text, just a quick, it doesn't need to be long, but having one person out there in the world that you text a good morning and a good night to significantly increases mental wellness and thriving. So thanks, Goddess.
I have never seen this study, and it saves one more study that I don't have to do. I have felt this for so long. And I'll just say, every single time I've been in a relationship, I've never been with a man that likes to do the morning and night text. Actually, sorry, that's not true. One or two, but mostly not. And every single time I always feel like a in the morning and then like at nighttime. And then I thought, maybe I should not need that. I'll just put like, maybe that's not a big thing. And if everyone doesn't want to do it, maybe I'm the one that...
Red flag. Red flag. Let's just pause there for a moment.
This was in
Did we all hear the red flag?
This was my...
Maybe I shouldn't need that. Oof.
That's what your 30s are for.
Right. But I just want to point that out. We all have that moment. Maybe I should need that.
Yes.
He doesn't want to give it to me.
Yes. Yes. And
big red flag.
When I had my last major breakup early in my 40s, I remember saying, everything this relationship taught me is to question every single thing I need and only to graduate from it knowing the answer is yes. And I've never questioned that since. Ever since I've been like it's on my deal breaker list. Like if it's not your nature, I don't want to make you do it. But if it's not your nature, our natures aren't similar enough. And so I love that we are both single right now for the first time in how long? 20 years? Something like this?
At least.
Yes. We certainly did our single days back in our 20s.
Yep.
That was one version of the single years. And now we're in another version of the single years.
Era of singleness.
Yes. And in this era of singleness, we text each other good morning and good night. And I think that's wonderful. I think things like that, I mean, cuddling with my dog at night, having a beautiful, experience of self-pleasuring, being very confident and comfortable taking myself on dates. I guess I know I can hold my own hand. I can buy myself flowers. I can write my name in the sand.
Thank you, Miley Cyrus.
Right? Sometimes the lyrics just nail it because there is something that when you can fill a lot of your cup yourself, it doesn't have you participate or say yes to something that's subpar in terms of what you need.
Right.
Because
you are your own beloved.
Yes,
and there isn't anything, there's this whole narrative around love and romance. Someone is going to complete me. And when we actually embrace like being complete, being whole, and being sovereign, and being in intimacy, and being two sovereign, whole beloveds that have come together, whether in romance or in sisterhood, it creates a whole other dynamic.
Absolutely. And I will say, I also feel like in a lot of ways I've experienced it go too far. People are like, I don't need anyone. I don't need a man. Right? I don't need that because I have all these things filled. And I think there's a hyper individualization.
That's like the pendulum swung too far.
I was going to say we go. I call it in my book the AZ problem. And did you notice I said Z? I didn't use Canadian Z.
I'm so tuned into the American that I didn't even notice.
You didn't even notice? You're always
well
like
done,
when
Goddess.
I spell otter or something when I spell it, you're like, Canadian spelling.
Check with a QUE.
Oh, wait, you notice when I do Canadianisms,
Yes.
but not when I've moved on to Americanisms.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So we'll go back to the AZ problem, which is that you wake up to that you're doing A. So you're like, I'm going to do Z, forgetting there's an entire alphabet in between. So it's like, oh, I've been pandering and wanting a man or a relationship, so I don't need a relationship and I don't need anything. And I think one of the big dances of my personal evolution has been coming to how do I make my cup overflowing and also totally recognize I'm meant to be in union. Like
making space still.
Yeah. The sovereign unity, and I'm not going to go into quantum physics, but I am for a moment.
Good. It's okay. I'm here for it.
like the fabric of reality is made by particles and waves, and they don't happen one or the other. You don't have this thing being a wave or a particle. It's both at the same time, and it's like a paradox you can barely wrap your head around, right? So we won't go further than it, but I also feel like I am such a sovereign individual and feel completely whole on my own, and I will feel a different wholeness when I'm in a partnership union. I don't know how to explain that, but those two truths hold true for me. So,
and I think just from a very, if we take it out of the quantum physics and back into...
If we have to.
For those of us that didn't study quantum physics, don't have a PhD and 3 other degrees. For the rest of us, that is also a path of healing and a path away from the patriarchy, right? To reclaim, to decolonize, and to be in not hyper individualization, but actually in wholeness.
Right.
And to know that I am not trying to fill something that's empty. I'm not trying to be saved or be taken care of, that I am whole and I am choosing myself.
Mm-hmm.
And there is space for partnership. There is an open welcoming of intimacy when it comes.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all those letters in between the A to Z.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's finding the dance, the nuance of how can I really accept and savor and be in love with this time of life where I'm alone.
Right.
And also know that at any moment, we often say, let's enjoy this time when we're both single, because one day we might not be.
Might not be?
Won't be.
I'm pretty sure.
For sure.
Yeah. Knowing you and me, for sure. Yeah.
So let's enjoy this. Let's embrace this. And it's not like I don't need. I mean, I, coming out of an 18-year relationship, am maybe more on the side of like, okay, I'm open to partnership, but I'm absolutely not looking for it.
Sure.
I'm savoring and enjoying and, really being in my own space and protecting my focus on the things I want to create.
Yes.
And doing it differently. I'm in a different season than you are.
Yes.
And at the same time, it's not a protection. It's not like, oh, I won't let anyone in. It's just, no, I'm really falling in love with this season of life. And I know there'll be another chapter when I'm in partnership again.
Yeah, it makes me wonder because, I've been mostly single. I think my longest relationship has been 3 years, and I had a couple of those. And that's, I've been dating for 35 years, right? So I've had 2 years celibate, another year celibate, another year celibate. And I've also been with 3 people in 1 week. For me, it's always about the sacred connection. And I don't question how much time's gone by or whether this is a relationship or not. I just know this is a sacred connection. And right now it's this. And that could be a relationship or not. But it's interesting in those big spaces of aloneness and with myselfness, there was an intimacy that was taking up space that was not coming from a man, but there was still incredible intimacy. And sometimes that was self-intimacy. Like the year that I was in Portugal, just before COVID, I painted and wrote poetry for a year and got to be my artist self. And I had exited my co-working space, so I didn't have to work for the first time since I was 10. And I never knew who I was when I don't have to get up and be accountable to some sort of form of work. And I had exit money in my bank. I had a beautiful place in Portugal and no one needing anything from me. And I was 44, maybe 45. And I was just sitting there going, who am I? I was on the phone with you. Actually, I was on the phone with you and I had my bag packed and was leaving Portugal after being there for a few days for a conference. And I went to go to the airport with my bag packed and I stopped in my tracks and I said, my intuition is telling me not to leave here. So I rented an apartment for a month and I went to the apartment by myself and I sat in this apartment in this country I've never been in. And the forecast was to rain for a month. It wasn't even beautiful, sunny Portugal. They said, we've never had this before. It's not going to stop raining till Christmas. And it's November and it's cold and miserable and I know no one and they don't have heat there. And I'm sitting in this drafty apartment. And I called you and I was like, I am just sitting here. And I said to you, I don't know why nothing's going to happen. And you said, something's going to happen. And I hung up the phone and I just sat there and I looked around and I picked up this book and there was a pen and I started to write my first poem. And the next year, every morning I got up and wrote a poem and every afternoon I painted. And at the end of the year, I thought I had all of these piecemeal creations that I had got to be free of any process that required anything of me. I just got to be an expressive artist. I was finding out what was between A and Z and that space of what wanted to co-create or what wanted to express. And at the end of the year, the angel said, put that poem with that painting and put that poem with that painting. Now put this one first and that one second. And it filled the entire space like an art gallery and told a coherent story. And every poem matched up to a painting. And I put out flyers and I had an art opening and people came and it was beautiful. And I realized, oh my gosh, even in the empty space where I'd gone way into the feminine with no form of the masculine, like there was no structure at all. And there was no plan for even the poem or the painting. My hand moved and I watched it. I'd pick up colors and I'd watch my hand and tears would roll down my face as my hand moved in a perfect circle. Like I was just in a surrender completely to the creative process. And at the end, I realized, there was a process happening, but it was one I'd never seen before, which I do the piece right in front of me. And then the universe is guiding it into a coherent story and installation. And it created the patterning for everything like the creating of Sofanya, which is much like the podcast creation. There's a North Star and the pieces just flow in. So you're working with the two, the masculine and the feminine together. So even in that empty space of nothingness, and in that year, I didn't date anyone except for the German.
By the way, we should preface this with like, maybe all girlfriends do this, but they all have like a title.
Code name for the...
Code name.
Right. Well, when I was traveling the world to 25 countries, my one friend said, don't date anyone from the same country, because it was like, is it the Spaniard? Is it...
So this is the German.
This is the German.
Yes.
Fair. And I got guided, before I went to the conference in Portugal, I got guided to Majorca, and I painted a painting, and then I got guided to Ibiza. And when I was there, I got to a hotel that I had been guided to, and I went to put on my pajamas, and the angel said, don't put on your pajamas, go downstairs and sit at the bar. And I don't even drink. And I went downstairs to the bar, and I was so tired, and I sat down, I ordered a drink, and I turned around, and there's this 6'6", beautiful specimen of a god, of a man who barely speaks English. And we start talking the best we can. He's a couple years older than me, there with his friends from Germany. And we proceed to become lovers. And the whole time I'm in Portugal, every 5 to 6 weeks, he'd come over for 5 days. And because he didn't speak English, we couldn't talk in between. And he was also an engineer. And it was a beautiful nonverbal love affair where when he would come over, I had a lingerie closet, and I would just say, pick out lingerie, and I would wear it, and I would paint for him while he read his German book, because we couldn't talk, so he could watch me paint in lingerie. So he was even part of this unique thing, which was, this was my year of being an artist and nothing else. And even in having the masculine in, he provided exactly what that process needed for me, which is a lot of space, but then a frequent visit, without a lot of verbal, without a lot of the mind, just expressing in colors, even what I was wearing and what I was doing when we were together. So I feel like there's a lot of different roles the masculine, like, a man in my life can play in intimacy.
Well, and I think you're saying too, like the time in between partnership, what I'm calling that empty space is not empty at all. It's filled with a lot of things, right? For me, I'm protecting my focus. I'm creating this podcast, creating the company, writing my book. There's creation happening. But again, we're so programmed to sort of go from, the relationship holds such high priority in our culture.
And I will even change the word relationship to the role.
Romance even, especially.
And I'd say role. So like I used to say for that phase, I was like, I don't want any more relationships. I want relating. And the reason I was saying that is that I didn't want the role of relationship. I didn't want the role that I'm required to do this and you're required to do that. And then that limits the other things that I'm able to do. It's like putting me in the box of what a relationship is supposed to be and do. And so I've always called lovers, because to me, they're more than lovers. They're journey mates. They're the perfect person for this time and space that actually brings so much, even though they don't occupy the role that everyone would say is worthy or sacred. They just be like, oh, he's just a lover. And I'm like, no, this is this perfect person who comes and does this perfect thing. And fills this in a way that's so mutually fulfilling for us. He was a couple years on the other side of divorce, so it was very new for him to be with a different woman. And so he was having his experience, and he was so used to having like 2 children and a wife that needed and wanted so much from him. He was learning English the whole time, so I got more and more from him about his story. But for him,
there was some talking.
Eventually. And it never was a lot.
Right.
But I did find out what he was getting from it. And I remember saying to him when he could speak, you know, you keep coming over to visit me. What do I give you? What is it? And he's handsome. And I was like, you could be with anyone. I remember my friend Kevin saying he was gay. He was like, this is the hottest man you've ever been with. And I'm like, word. And he was like, I was like, you could be with anyone. You're flying all the way from Portugal or from Germany to be here. And he said, you make me feel so seen and so appreciated. You're always so grateful. And my eyes water because I feel for men. I've heard this so many times. And I'm always like, thank you so much for taking me for dinner. It's so thoughtful. You found 3 options and you opened my door for me. I just had the most wonderful time. And so many men have said to me, no woman's ever said that. Like they're upset if I don't do that, but they're never grateful if I do. It's like, good, you're supposed to. And poor men. And I've said to a man before who was there for me, and just at a coffee shop, we're having a deep talk, and I ended up having a bit of a cry. And I said, thanks so much for giving me your masculine presence out of nowhere while I shared that story. And he teared up. He was in his 30s and said, no one has ever thanked me for my masculinity. And it's like men are punished if they don't, not thanked if they do, show up in a very specific way for the feminine. And yet the way that this man was showing up was exactly what I needed. And some people would be like, he doesn't even call you in between. And I'm like, but that's actually what I need. I need to be with my poetry and my art because I'm an artist. I call it my tragic artist phase. But there's all these experiences outside of definitions and roles and performance and checklists and expectations and demands that can limit the experience to what it really could be. And so here's my question.
Okay, ready.
My question is, I hear you say, I want to protect my flow right now, which almost says if a man comes in, it won't be. And I think that's true because most of our experiences are that we both fall into these roles and we get limited. Do you think, like philosophically, is it possible for there always to be a man there in the capacity that's necessary for that phase, but we limit it because we're so programmed by roles and expectations and past experiences?
Probably yes. I think it also depends on the person, right? We can have all of our ideas and all of our expectations, and we have a whole other human coming in with their expectations and ideas of what relationship might mean or relating. So
does that automatically mean that affects yours though? So here, let me propose something. I feel like we're programmed to be like, oh, they come in with these needs. I need to start compromising. You know, that's like everyone says relationships are compromise. I've never felt that. I feel like relationships are co-creation. And when both people put their needs on the table, they can look at them and go, that's not a fit for right now. Right? If I have to protect my space given the needs you have, it's not a fit. Rather than no relationship. Maybe not you, but does that mean there's not someone else that could come and go, oh yeah, your needs and my needs really match?
Right. The timing is perfect for what we both need. Yeah, absolutely. Nothing's off the table, goddess. We just, right now no one's knocking at the door.
May I propose? Maybe it's hard for someone to knock at the door when it's like, I'm really protecting my space. Can I just
yes, and I think right now, again, I'm coming out of a really long relationship and another relationship, and it only been out a few months, and really simply enjoying my singleness.
Right.
And have only so much bandwidth and my intimacy right now feels so precious for myself. And I do ask myself that question, like, I literally was like, well, if we're going to talk about sex on the podcast, I better start having some. What will we talk about?
Not only are we
also warned my 14-year-old daughter that mom was going to be talking about sex on the internet.
And she said,
so I shouldn't listen to it on the bus with all the other 8th graders. It's like, maybe just put your earphones in.
I think it's incredible that you have a young teenage daughter and you have posted yourself in your lingerie, and she saw it and said, "My friends are wondering about you posting in your underwear.
Please stop posting pictures of yourself in your underwear."
And you said,
"They don't." Well, because I said, "Why?" And she's like, "All my friends follow you on Instagram." And I said, "They don't have to follow me."
And why do you feel like it's important? I mean, a lot of moms would be like, there's movies out there where moms don't do that until their daughter's 21 and have left the house. And
right. I mean, for me, it's so much about reclaiming my own sensuality, sexuality, full expression. And it's a growth edge for me. It's something, there's so much conditioning and programming around being a good girl. And I think purity culture and what's appropriate. I remember my mom using that word a lot, like what's appropriate.
That's not appropriate, Anya.
Right.
Go put on more clothes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I remember being in high school and the principal, oh my God, this is flashing back. I was wearing a skirt that was, what was it? It was a cutoff jean skirt, and he was stapling the bottom of it so it wasn't frayed because it was inappropriate to have a frayed skirt.
I mean, 2025, we are still having this conversation with young girls in schools around dress codes. Not that long ago, I called our school and there was like a dance coming up and there was a dress code for the girls. And of course, I get on the phone. I'm like, why is there a dress code? And why can't the girls wear spaghetti straps? Like, the onus on girls to not be a distraction to boys is ridiculous. And for that one dance, they did end up scrapping or, changing the dress code. And I was the heroine among the 8th graders for a moment. And it's a much larger conversation. I say to my daughter all the time, like, you should get on the school board. Like, this is something, if you want to wear a shirt where your belly is showing, don't just do it and get in trouble, but actually make a change, right? Change the system, which is saying that by showing skin, you are distracting boys, which ultimately it's like your responsibility for them to not be attracted to you or be distracted, or it's all kind of backwards. So back in high school, that's still actually happening right now in schools all over the US where we have these dress codes for girls.
Right.
So for me as a mother, I know that I lived with that kind of internally. Yeah. And I mean, even I did 2 boudoir photo shoots in the last year.
Gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous.
And were really for me, right? Those photos, I did my first one right after coming back from ayahuasca. I knew that I had a week between ayahuasca and having surgery to remove an ovary. And I unconsciously, consciously, right, called this boudoir photographer and I said, do you have time in this 1 week? And she said, I have this 1 day. And I knew it was like this divinely timed between ceremony and surgery that I was going to remember and have images of my body. And my body looks pretty much the same. It's a tiny little scar, but it was symbolic for me of having the celebration of my body at that moment of time. And it was, I think before that, you could have said like, why don't you grab some lingerie? And I would have, I don't even think I had any. Even for that photo shoot, I had some cute underwear and like maybe one sexy bra. Now I have half a closet.
Yeah.
Because it is about reclaiming that intimacy, that erotic code for myself.
Yes. And I know you wear your lingerie under your clothes. It's like for you.
Yes. Yeah, this morning I did a sexy dance striptease for me.
Awesome.
To get in my body, to get in my energy, to get into that erotic, that turned on, that powerful energy that really shifts everything for me. And so I want my daughter to see that. And I want her not to see like, oh, I'm shameless, but to see that, oh, I see where the cultural view of that is, and I reject that. And I reject that. And I want us to be having conversations about sex. I want us, meaning her and I, and you and I in the same way, to be having conversations about self-pleasure as she explores her own sexuality and encounters with boys. Like, I want her to know what does pleasure mean to me before I give it over to someone else?
Sure. The suppression of our sexual energy and what it does to our mind, body, and spirit is a real thing, like medically translates into anxiety, depression, all the things, right? Actually dying younger, all of this stuff. And that you incorporate this sexual embodiment and ownership for the self, and you do it in your practice and in your work with clients. I've experienced it. The last time I talked to you, I can't remember what it was about, but I had a huge cry and a huge healing, and you got me to go into a core wound really, really deep and cry it out. And at the end, you put on music, and the first song was just like me just trying to come back to my body after the release and move a little bit. And the next one, you got me to be sensual and just like touch myself and touch my face and like open my blouse a little bit and feel myself. And then the last one, we got topless and we were just like
on Zoom, baby,
just like going for it. And I have to tell you, like, I left on like so healed, so empowered, and it wouldn't have been the same if we didn't do those last 3 songs. Like, I remember just going, God, she's got the goddess energy that makes me bring it back inside myself. Again, we're not lesbians. This was therapeutic.
But again, why? And that's again a cultural kind of like, oh, it must be going to that instead of we as women are celebrating each other's bodies. That the goddess culture was a celebration of the female body.
Right. Of menstrual blood, of wombs.
You are literally the creation embodied, right? You are creation manifest. You bring life. And so even though we're joking, like, we're not lesbians, it's also like, we reject that. We reject that we even have to put that disclaimer because we are in celebration of our own bodies and each other's bodies.
Absolutely. It's flashback from high school again. Wendy and I were best friends and inseparable, and reorganized all of our classes to be together. And like, there was one season she played at one sport that I didn't play. It was the worst semester of my life. And we were so attached at the hip. And there was just constant rumors in our hometown that we were lesbians, It's
like people have no imagination. It's the best they can do.
Right. Like these,
fine.
Yeah. Like these 2 friends actually love each other. And it's, So anyways, it's just, I don't know.
But I want to actually go back to something you said, because in my experience, I mentioned the ovary.
Yes.
And I do really feel, so my own personal process with knowing I had a cyst on my ovary, and that by the time I asked my OBGYN, like, not to do surgery, we gave it more time, we watched it. And eventually she said, like, it's growing and it's growing quickly. And the danger was that it would twist and, rupture the ovary, and then I'd be in emergency surgery. And she said, if you do the surgery now electively, we can go in laparoscopically, you'll have a tiny scar. But I had so much grief around losing my ovary. But I also really, through processing that grief and understanding, came to, and again, this was just my own, I think we make sense of things in our own way. And the way that I made sense of it was that I had taken so much of my creative expression and suppressed it and pushed it down in order to play the roles that I was playing. And that ovary and that cyst were the physical manifestation of that suppression. And in releasing that, I knew I had to release the ovary with the cyst for my health. And so many times in the last year, when things have come up, when I've been in a situation where, I'm contemplating staying or going in a relationship, I've come to a moment and said, I never again. Like, I've lost an ovary by playing spall, by suppressing my desire, my full expression. And that's a really high price to pay. And I see women epidemically having health issues because we are suppressing the feminine.
Absolutely.
And I will just never do it again.
Absolutely. Have you ever read or heard of Christine Northrup, Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom? Medical doctor who basically puts in this book years ago that every woman that she ever took a cyst from was ending a marriage, and she just, or a hysterectomy. And then I told my mom that and my aunt that, and they both had hysterectomies when they were getting divorced. And I would start mentioning it to women, and you'll see in your own life, this is very real. That all gets pushed down.
Yeah.
And it's
what do we do with that creative sexual expression?
Yeah. Where does it go?
Where does it go?
And I'm wearing a shorter skirt right now, and I'm remembering a partner when I was in my mid-30s told me a woman over 30 or 35 doesn't wear a short skirt, and I listened. I wore longer skirts. I was like, oh, that's probably true. I don't know that it suppressed anything in me, but I remember just going, oh, that's probably true. Like, what? And I'm 51 wearing a mini skirt. Like, yeah, that's just what?
Yeah. I mean, I think the questioning, right? We should always be questioning. I think that's one thing motherhood gave me was I would sometimes find myself saying something and go, where do I believe that? Is that true? Where did that come from?
Like what?
Don't sit that way, or what's appropriate. I'd find myself saying things like,
what's appropriate?
That's inappropriate. Or,
yes. Can I just say something?
Sit up like a lady. And I'd go, oh, where did that even come from? It was just so subconsciously programmed into my being. And then, of course, being a conscious, aware human, I could say, actually, I take that back. I don't mean that. That came from somewhere else. But it kind of brought it up really quickly. And I think anytime these things come up, whether they're as a mother or just whether you should wear mini skirts, we can say like, where does that even come from? And is that true?
We all just go, yeah. And then can one of us go, wait a minute, is it? Just to reflect on a neuroscience study. Just saying, the part of the brain that is storing information that is about what your parents taught you and romantic love and being a parent is all the same storage place. So you can be a very free-thinking person.
Not good news.
I know, right? And I'm just saying, again, this isn't your fault. This is the way the brain is designed to take what you learned from your parents and pass it on. It's one of those evolutionary things that until we bring consciousness and interrupt that default, we just do what our parents did. So people will be like, we know moms that started being moms when they were 40, so they know themselves pretty well. Not to say that someone in their 20s doesn't, but I've talked to older moms that are like, I didn't even know that I could say these things until I had a child and I saw my mother coming out of my mouth. And I'm like, well, that's because your brain took the recording tape and then is going to put it out your mouth. So it just takes consciousness and awareness. So just so you know, this is the programming that we've inherited.
And we can question it, and we can. And one of the greatest things I ever learned in parenting was we can repair it. Like the actual act of repairing or, admitting like, oh, I'm not sure where that came from, or I'm not sure that's actually how I wanted to deal with it. That was programming that came. That was just so automatic that we do actually more growth and repair with the relationship by acknowledging that.
I agree with this. And that this whole era of, because I'm your parent, because I said so, this is how it is. I
mean, sometimes at 9:00 when you just want your kid to go to bed.
I don't
do pull the like, because I said so.
I don't doubt it. And understandably so.
Take a tired, exhausted, overwhelmed mom and give her that 9:00 and you're like, you know why?
It's 9.
I said so.
And I would say you stand by that 9:00 is bedtime. But when you don't stand by it, you'll say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And that permission to connect with them, like connect, not correct, and be like vulnerable and be human with them and let them see you pivot on your own convictions gives them permission and a role model to do so. I think it's incredible. Yeah. Okay. I love all of this. So I had a dream last night.
Going into dreams. What do dreams mean to you? Like why?
Okay.
I love having, the dream conversation, but I think dreams are specifically important to the way that you process and reflect on guidance.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So you were talking about your body and you having an ovary out and all that it meant to you, right? So I also had to have a back surgery, and that's a much longer story. But long story short, I also went and had beautiful pictures taken of my body before I had the surgery, and it wasn't going to be a small little incision.
Do you want to tell the back surgery story?
I can, yeah. I mean, when I was 40, I just stopped being able to walk. My legs would collapse from underneath me. And if I was carrying something heavier than a laptop, I would fall. And when they did the MRI, they found out my sacrum and my lowest vertebrae that was supposed to have a disc between them. There was no more disc, and they had ground each other down to 50% and were on an angle. And they told me it was because when I was 2, something happened that broke my back. And the first time a healer put their hand on my back, I relived my childhood physical abuse, where I was physically pretty much beaten when I was around from 2 to 3. And it had broken my back, and no one knew until it had gone this far. And I was told that there was nothing that could be done about it except for a few years of really intense daily physio that could have my stomach muscles hold my back such that they wouldn't collapse my legs, but I would never be able to BLT again, bend, lift, or twist. So for 3 years, incredible physio and very carefully sitting, very carefully standing, and always in chronic pain until I lied down. And when I lied down, there'd be relief. And I talked to a number of surgeons, and they said there's minimal surgery that could maybe keep it in place with a lot of risk. Like you could be paralyzed, you could lie down and not be out of pain, never have relief, and be 24/7 pain, which I couldn't fathom. And then I did all this physio, I did all this emotional work about the abuse I had suffered. It's a lot of hard inner work and physical work. And then one day I felt a hand on the small of my back, and I jumped and it hurt. And there was no one around me. And I heard an angel say in my ear, "You don't have to live like this." And I saw clairvoyantly a schematic that they were showing me of 12 pieces of metal going into my sacrum and lowest vertebrae that would rebuild and restructure it. And as a mechanical engineer, I looked at it and thought that would physically work. So for a year, I talked to doctors all across the country asking if they would do the surgery. And everyone said, no, that the same thing could paralyze you, et cetera. I'd never seen that before.
Too risky.
And then one day I talked to a doctor, and he said, not only will I do that surgery, I do that surgery. I pioneered it. And it's really ideal for a woman your age and your health. And I couldn't believe it. I then set out on the terrifying journey of knowing I was going to be cut open 4 inches on my front and 2 inches and T-spots in my back, with everything inside of me placed on a table and 12 pieces of metal going into me, and then putting all my guts back in and sewing me up. And that was going to happen. So now I had worked so hard to find this answer, and now I was going to have to do this answer. And I was terrified. But similarly to you, I was like, I want to document my body before all of these scars. And I went to this beautiful place. I went into nature and was on a picnic table and had photos taken of me, a little different than the boudoir, but similar. This is nature version. And I remember feeling like in healing this, I'm healing the abuse that happened to me. That's been a time bomb in my body waiting till I was old enough, and it had gone far enough that I had to deal with it. And I had also done 3 years of therapy healing all of it. So it felt like on the other side of the surgery, I'd be free of this. And the reason this matters so much about the dream thing is that because of that abuse, I had had only nightmares my whole life. I had had dreams that were filled with nightmares. And when I was 30, I went and found this person who had abused me, and I talked to them about it as a grown woman in a very epic story that's chronicled in my memoir. And when I talked to him and told him and forgave him and saw him as a grown woman, and I wasn't a 2-year-old anymore, something inside of me deeply healed. And in that night, I had the same nightmare that I was always terrified of a man chasing me that was going to get me. But in the dream, for the first time ever, I stopped and I turned and faced him. And I knew I was going to be pummeled, but I also knew I was going to survive it. And I stood it, and I stood strong. And just before he reached me, I saw in his eyes in my dream that he realized I wasn't afraid. And I saw him become afraid. And I woke up in my dream to another dream. And that dream was my hand writing on a piece of paper in a book. It took until 2005 for the last of her wounds to heal, and this was 2003, but it was worth it for a lifetime of freedom. And I shut the book.
Mm.
And I woke up from the dream and I never had a nightmare again. And all of a sudden I started to have those vivid dreams not be nightmares, but be information. And I started to have dreams that would tell me what was going to happen the next day, and then it would happen. Or I'd be processing something, or I'd learn a lesson in my dream. And so my dream went from 30 years of nightmares to the last 20 years of being informative.
Yeah, you'll often say to me, like, I had a dream, and then I'm like, okay, let's debrief on the dream.
Right. And I don't take it for granted that dream space is now nourishing rather than terrifying, and how hard I had to work to claim that space and work with it. And I in the first 5 years, I wrote down my dream, like after this. The first 5 years after that, I wrote down my dream every morning because it was so vivid and there was so much information. And it was so exciting to have a relationship in this place that had so much fear before. And it would be, a very detailed scene. And then I would circle each major thing that was in the dream. And it would be like I was sitting at a kitchen table with these 3 people, and we solved this kind of problem. And I would take the symbols out and I would look at them without the context of how I had them in the dream. And they all had meaning. And I was like, oh, it's not about these 3 people. It's about the 3 contracts I'm about to sign. And the kitchen table came to me symbolizing intimacy, what's at my table, what's really close and important to me. And I was like, I'm supposed to take all 3 contracts, and it gets solved by the things we talked about. That's the solution of having 3 contracts. We talked about adding more people. I have to hire a team. So I knew how to take what the dream symbols were and turn it into information and follow it. And it was accurate. And then I'd also have very detailed things like I had a dream that there was a woman with yellow fingernails driving a hearse. And I was like, that was really interesting. The yellow fingernails were very prominent and the hearse was very prominent. And then that day, one of my students came up to me and said, I have an emergency. Can I borrow your car? And I said, of course. Here's my keys. And she went to take them and she had yellow fingernails. And I was like, oh, actually, no. And I was like, she's going to crash my car or there's going to be an accident.
Interesting.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Flashes like that. So I would have these signs and signals that would help the next day for me to know. And so the dream last night, for example, is, as you know, I was guided to go to a movie last night. And when I got there, it was a premiere and everyone was in the lobby, 100 people. And I looked around and it was wonderful people, but I knew they weren't my people. And everything in me before this would have stayed to go, well, they're amazing people, so I should be part of this. And instead I left. I accepted that even though it's a great community, it doesn't mean it's my community. And in my dream, it was this huge house that had so many wonderful things going on. And everyone had invited me there and they wanted me to be a part of all of it. And I just told everyone I can't be here. It's a great party, but it's not my party. And I feel like what's happening in this phase of life is really choosing what's really, really me. It's been easy to choose what's not good. But if it's good, I've always been like, I'll try it on and, make friends with it. But it's almost like the message to me right now is be with you. Be with who is really, really resonant, your family, your friend.
And that's like discernment and resonance, right? Like knowing, is this really resonant for me?
Yes.
Do I give myself full permission to just not participate if it's not?
Yeah. And if someone's on my Facebook making comments that aren't interesting to me, even if they're not damaging, do I still even want to engage that? It might just be, before it was like, if you attack me, I'm going to unfriend you. But now it might just be like, if we're just not having a conversation that's interesting to me on my Facebook page, that might be enough to just hide the comment.
Or ignore it.
Yeah.
Right? And just it's like you don't even need to be in the room.
Right. Hiding it makes it out of my room, though, because it is my room. So anyways, it's almost like radical permission to be where it works for me.
Yeah.
It's a long version.
It's okay. I like the long version. You're good at the long version.
You're good at listening. This is why we're friends, listening to the long version. But I didn't know this until this conversation that we both had these body journeys of places where a lot of pain had been made us hurt and that we needed to have physical surgeries and that we both document our bodies before. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And interestingly, it's sort of like my dream, permission to not participate in that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Permission for that to be expelled from my world.
Yep. And reclaim what is resonant, what feels expansive.
Yes.
Whether that's wearing mini skirts or
Your lingerie
yeah,
on your Instagram.
yeah,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah. What are the things that are sparking you right now
Reclaiming
of expression and inspiration that feels so you? Like, what's so resonant for you right now? What's your sweet spot of like, hell yeah?
You know, I've had a morning routine for years of waking up, meditating, journaling, and now I've started adding in this kind of like dance of moving my body, not just a movement practice, not just like getting out the yoga mat, but really being in my sensual practice.
So wait, you get up every morning, you put on a song, and you just get down?
I mean, at some point, yeah, sometimes after the kids are at school, like
Yeah.
the time between awake and putting them on the bus is pretty short, but I've been adding this in as, yeah, putting on music. And, you know, it's like the things we choose to put on our bodies in the morning. Like, sure, I can go and grab a sweatshirt and sweatpants, or I can go and grab a beautiful silk robe. And I can put on a beautiful piece of lingerie underneath a shirt. No one needs to see it but me.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's there.
Yes, yes, yes.
And it's about that expression and that softness. I mean, we were talking about even like the when we had that conversation and you were kind of coming out of that rupture of that feeling of grief. And when I work with clients and even just like the soft feather touch
Yes.
is radical for so many of us. We're like, whoa, I'm waiting for someone to touch me like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can actually touch myself that way.
Mm-hmm.
I can awaken. I can be in self-intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels really vibrant right now. And
it's like really self-intimacy is your big thing right now. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely had years of it myself. Yeah. And I think there's nothing like it really of like, what would I do right now? Taking myself on a date. Mm-hmm. And that never goes away. Even when I'm with someone, I still take myself on dates. And
yeah, I mean, this is the first time in a long time. I mean, when I'm with kids, right? Pretty much they dominate the like, what do we need? So much of between work and clients and kids, there's very little time. So I empathize and I really understand as women who are mothers and mothering, as we all do in our own way, but with the very real demands of small children and humans to keep alive. And mine are actually pretty self-sufficient, but when they were younger, right, there is a lot of demand. And I think it's really alive for me right now because I'm writing about that chapter of life in my book of like,
yes,
how do you go from, you know, a relationship that has connection and intimacy and end up in this kind of place where we are so far from each other. And a lot of moms are doing that in the physical and emotional demands of children. So
absolutely.
when I'm with them one week, I have a lot of that.
Yeah.
And then I have the luxury right now of having this week to myself.
Yeah.
And being immersed in Sofanya and you and that
and
self-intimacy.
And you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in my own space and time in a way, just even in the last 6 months that I haven't been.
Yeah.
And so that's feeling really vibrant for me right now and loving it.
When the kids were young, I remember you've always had short hair. You had a pixie cut short hair all the time for years, ever. And I remember, except for your wedding, I suppose. But I remember saying to you, I had like long hair for the first time ever and I was loving it. And I said, you could have long hair. You could just grow it. And I said, why don't you? It'd be beautiful. And you're like, it just gets in my face. It was just like, it was what was functional.
There is a season of life when kids are small where it is literally survival.
I believe
feels like it, right? It just feels like every moment. We don't have a village, right? Most of us are doing this in silos.
Right.
And at the time, my partner was working long hours and 2 small kids and trying to run a business from home and juggle all the things. And it just becomes like you're at the end, right? So
it's the main reason I didn't do it.
Right.
Is that I remember when I would contemplate having a child with who I was with, I would be like, but what if I want to sleep or do yoga? And they need something from me, but I want to sleep or it was literally, it would be like, what if I want to sleep or do yoga? That was literally what would come up. And so it's so fascinating because the patriarchy really began when we went from being hunter-gatherers to being agriculture-based, and we started to settle in any way. And before that, people think like the men hunted and the women gathered, and the women because the women were watching children. Not true. They found bones of people back then, and men have patterns in their bones of carrying children and being with children. There's the drawings of men. There's like tools of feeding a bottle that men are buried with. So there was a lot of equal, the village. And the village was naturally doing this for a couple of reasons. One, the woman could really only have one child. You couldn't have a ton of children you're carrying around. You can only have a child per person, basically, because you're moving all the time. It just wasn't possible. And then also, whatever caregiving, domestic work was visible. No one was behind a wall, right? So everything was sort of egalitarian. And they even have women buried with all of the hunting equipment, all the gear, and patterns of women as hunters in their bones, like of what a hunter would be. So that's what was happening. When they settled with agriculture, then there wasn't just like, are there animals around to hunt? It was like, we can actually use animals to constantly be working the fields. And so men weren't doing that because they were stronger. The animals were doing the work. It was that women could have more children now because there was more food and more being still. So now all of a sudden a culture goes to having 3 or 4 kids, and now a woman isn't breastfeeding. The only thing pretty much the only thing she can do is breastfeed, and that's not even true. There's other, mothers that could do that. But long story short is that she's breastfeeding maybe 3 or 4 children now, and now she's away for a few years, 7, 8 years or something. And all of a sudden the man's just automatically visible, and she's behind walls alone. And that's where it happened.
And that's really what we have now.
12,000 years later. Yeah. So 12,000 years ago is when we went from hunter-gatherer to this agriculture-based society. That is when patriarchy started. And it's simply because women got behind walls, and that's when domestic work became invisible and became burden on the woman. And because men were visible and working the land, they owned the land. And the only way they could make sure the land got passed on to their sons was to make sure that they owned the womb that had the son. And so then marriage came in to own the woman as property.
The patriarchal prison of marriage.
Just saying.
It's a whole other episode.
Just saying. That's how it all began. And so today in modern theory, patriarchal theory, they call it the double burden of the feminine, where women came into the workforce really in the last decades, but they didn't lose any of the domestic duties. And even in the most progressive relationships I know, it is still very prominent that the emotional burden falls on, even if it's not the domestic.
Right. Well, there's the invisible workload of mothering, right? It's just like all the things that we're keeping track of at any given moment. That's not just the house and the kids, but at any moment we have lists of things that need to be done, the doctors, the camp forms, the this, the that. We're just sort of keeping it all, and it's falling on the mother's shoulders.
And 12,000 years ago, it was the village. And when they say it takes a village, and it's really hard to do that when we live so compartmentalized with a lot of walls between us, and everyone's really, the nuclear thing is really hard, and it's not the nature of human society. And I don't know what the answer is exactly, but as a woman that doesn't have children, I've always loved being involved. But I also feel like the moms around me don't welcome me in as part of the village. They've taken up that mantle. And they're like, this is my cross to bear. To what do you say? My bear. Yeah,
this is to bear. Yeah. There's a little bit of like the martyr of the mother for sure.
Yeah, and that's programming as well. And I know a lot of grandparents that would love to be more involved and that feel very at arm's length and pushed away.
And I think there's also nuance in that too, right? Of understanding like,
do you want that?
Do I want, right? If we're trying to deprogram from where we came from.
Do we want and
now I put my child with the grandparent who just repeats all of that programming.
There's that
too.
Well, and so there's also
I'll take
like
free babysitting and comes with a price.
Right. The other thing is that there's a lot of educational pressure. All the research is that parents have gone up by 40 to 50% of the amount of hours they spend with their child preparing them for competitive college entry, university entry. And that's prominent. And that didn't exist before in the same way. And so parenting is now preparing for survival later on, rather than actually just hanging and connecting and it being relaxing. Now the parent has this other duty as well. And it's all the very masculine doing and not the feminine being. It's the masculine performing and really mental. And not the feminine creativity and emergence and allowing. It's like we have so much, the to-do list takes over. The to-do list is very masculine. And the feminine gets lost and everyone's sort of craving that connection, that softness, that just beingness. There's so much pressure everywhere. And the parents have taken that on and the children have taken that on for very realistic, competitive landscape of everyone going to school now.
And I would say for anyone, like my experience of reclaiming the feminine, right? I think that's some of this can just be like, oh, it's so much and it becomes overwhelming. And where do I even start, right? And from someone who identifies as someone who lived in her masculine, was disconnected from this feminine energy, from this, maybe that's why it's so alive, this erotic, this sensual creativity, this feminine energy. I can say baby steps are huge. Right?
What would be the start?
It could be something as simple as like, what does it feel like to allow instead of to do? Like, what would it be like to walk in my garden today and be in my garden, not garden? Just to be in, I mean, it's one of the beautiful things about microdosing and psychedelics is that they actually
soften the wiring, the hard wiring, the default wiring.
They, I have clients who are like, I'm going to get more done. And I'm like, maybe not. Right? Sometimes microdosing actually, we get less done and that's okay. Can we remember we are human beings, not human doings?
Absolutely.
And can the invitation be to wherever you are on the journey, open up to some curiosity about what would it be like to just soften and look for, we talk about this all the time, like the field gives us answers. When we pose a question, let the field speak. So asking the question of like, where can I be more in my feminine? Where can I receive more? How can I create a practice that softens me? Maybe I add something sensual touch, or I take a bath at night just for myself, or
light a candle.
A candle.
I used to, when I was so busy, I would light a candle while I was doing something just because it was just a second. It took a second, but it created a different experience of the whole thing.
Totally. Changes the energy. Creates a sacredness to that moment.
Right.
And can we... I think that's just an invitation to let the field speak to you as well, to say when I ask that question or I create that invitation in my own life, what emerges?
This is why we're creating the sacred rituals for Sofanya that go along with the products. It's so important. The products are incredible themselves, but that you would have a QR code when you take the Blissful Sleep Gummy that takes you to a nighttime meditation that invites you to light a candle that has a lovely soft scent, spray your pillow with lavender oil, like the little things that you can do. These are actually reprogramming the nervous system and getting us into the softer side.
Well, and maybe being in our masculine is actually it's a defense. It's part of being in our fight or flight. We are in that kind of hyper individualization. We're in that defense mechanism.
Like, I've got this.
Right.
Yeah. I'll make sure that my child gets to school and it doesn't have the errors and the things that I had to deal with because I have it. I'll control it.
Yeah. So that's my only kind of, I think some of this can just feel like it's a lot. It's in every corner of every part of the conversation. And so it's like, what can we do today? That's something I always ask. Like, what can I do today to just soften? How can I be in this same situation if I'm dealing with refinancing or I'm dealing with divorce lawyers? Like, can I stay in the feminine? Can I be strong and soft at the same time?
I have a playlist called Deep in Spreadsheets.
Of course you do.
that gives me the energy that I want to feel when I'm solving a problem and it's like I'm on a case and it's a mystery rather than I have to, then they get it done. And I noticed when I slowed things down that I started going to my hyper masculine and I had this energy of like pulling up my sleeves and going in. I was like, oh, this is going to be hard. Okay, I got it. Okay. And I was like, every time I did that, I'd stop and go, how can I do exactly what I'm about to do? It's going to take the same time and it's going to have to happen. But how can I do it that it feels fun and nourishing? Is there anything fun and nourishing about it? And I was like, I actually do love numbers. Math was my favorite subject, which is why I became an engineer. How can I make this? And so I made this playlist and I would do it at a time of day where I was almost dancing while I was looking at it. Like I wouldn't do it when I was tired. I was doing it when there was dancing energy, and I'd go and work out after. So I'd take all that masculine energy that was really having to focus on all these little squares, and then I'd go and have a good like muscular workout. So I kind of merged it all. But
I mean, if you can make spreadsheets sexy, goddess, anything is possible.
Maybe I can make anything sexy if I can make spreadsheets.
This is the hypothesis of our life.
I think she can make anything sexy is a great place to leave this episode.
You too can make anything sexy.
We believe
the
in
feminine is available to all of us at any moment.
Yes. And she always makes everything more sexy.
Yes. That's the Everyday Magic Podcast. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. See you next time.